Hi everyone, it's Lauren and welcome to part 2 of my May reading wrap up. If you'd like to see part 1, I will leave a link in the corner up here and in the description box below. That video is mainly based on the Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction shortlisted books that I've read. And these are the other books that I read in the month of May, so let's get started. The first book that I read was The Things I Would Tell You, which is a collection of writings by British Muslim women, which is edited by Sabrina Mahfouz. I expected this book to be very similar to The Good Immigrant, which was edited by Nikesh Shukla, and it's not actually that similar, so that was my fault. I should have understood that properly. This isn't essays, this is actually a collection. There are some essays, but it's a collection of writing. So there's poetry, there's short stories, there's like play transcripts. So it's a very varied collection of writings actually from a wide range of women. With that being the case, there are some works in here that I really liked and others that I just didn't gel with. So I think that will be the case for anyone who reads this because there's so many varied styles. There's going to be some that you like and some that you don't like so much. But what I really enjoyed, I think the most for me, were the essays. There was one in there that was very interesting about the West's relationship with Israel and how that then affects its relationship with the rest of the Middle East. And yeah, there's perspectives from women in Britain and the UK, but also in other countries as well. And it just examines lots of different perceptions of being a Muslim woman and lots of different ideas and different backgrounds in that regard as well. So overall, I thought it was a very interesting collection and it was great to hear so many different new voices. Next, I picked up some poetry and I read What We Buried, which is a collection of poems by Caitlin Seal, and this was a birthday present, I believe, from Jen Campbell. I really liked this collection and I'm going to find it very difficult to describe it to you because I just really enjoyed her writing style. But what these poems I think examine are some past relationships that she's had, the relationships between men and women, and it kind of strips back as you read through the collection. So we start with some poems very much about relationships, then she starts kind of examining herself as a woman and her relationship with men in general, and then what she was like as a girl growing up, and then what she would say to her children, how she thinks girls and boys should be raised, and it kind of strips her back to something a little bit more basic and a bit more human. So it's quite an interesting journey. She says on the back here that she's very interested in healing, and I think that's quite a good way to describe this collection, that she's looking at pain in her life and she's kind of bringing that to the forefront and having a look at it and examining it. I don't know if that description really does this book justice, but I really enjoyed her writing style, and I find it very difficult to talk about poetry, but I would definitely recommend this collection. Next is something that I was unfortunately quite disappointed with in the end, which was Memoirs of a Polar Bear by Yoko Tawada, and I had quite high hopes for this book. This is the story of 3 polar bears, 2 of which at least are real life polar bears. You go through 3 different generations. The first is the grandmother, who is a memoirist in the USSR, and she's writing books, and I loved that story because it's just so much magical realism. This polar bear is just going around writing her books, getting them published. I really enjoyed that. The next story is about her daughter, who is a performer in an East German circus, and I really didn't enjoy that story. It was from the perspective of the polar bear's trainer, and I just felt like I really didn't get on with that one. And then the third one is about that polar bear's son, Canute, who was born in Berlin Zoo and was rejected at birth, so he was raised by humans. So I really like the idea of these stories. I just don't feel like they were pulled off properly, and each story just changed style so much. And I wasn't quite sure at the end of this book what she was trying to say. It wasn't bad. Parts of the book I did really enjoy. I think I just had such high hopes going in and I was a little bit let down. So it was fine, but not quite as magical as I'd hoped. The next book I read was Strange Heart Beating by Ellie Goldstone, and this is so interesting to me. So when I first started reading it, I absolutely loved the writing style so much. Like within the first kind of 30 pages, I was thinking this might be one of my favourite books of the year because her style is so funny and witty, and it's just, I really loved her writing. And then unfortunately, as I continued reading, I think the plot sort of petered out a little bit, but generally this is a debut novel and I think her writing is very exciting. This is about a man who has just lost his wife, Leda. She's been killed by a swan, so in a bit of a ironic twist on the Leda and the swan myth. And as part of his grieving process, he goes back to her hometown in Latvia and is trying to uncover parts of her life that he didn't know about, like before he knew her. And when I say that I felt like the plot sort of fizzled out a bit, that doesn't mean that this isn't still a very good book. I think I just loved it so much at the beginning and my expectations shot up as soon as I started reading it, and then as it continued, they sort of tempered a little bit, and I think I still gave this about 3 stars. But despite that, or because of it, I suppose, that makes me very, very excited about Ellie Goldstone's next work, like what she's going to produce next, because this is a debut novel and I think she's a very, very exciting new voice, and I'm really interested to see which direction her writing takes. And finally, we have a bit of a retro one, which is I, Robot by Isaac Asimov, and this was lent to me by my friend Kate when I said I wanted to try and read a little bit more science fiction, and I really enjoyed this. It is more like a book of short stories, which I wasn't expecting, and less of a sort of through narrative, but considering that some of these stories were written in the 1940s, I was very impressed about just how relevant this is today, to be honest. Asimov takes these 3 logical rules: that a robot cannot harm a human being, must obey a human being, and the third rule is that they must have an element of self-preservation, but only when that doesn't interfere with the first 2 rules. And basically he takes this concept and just plays it out again and again in ever more complex situations. So we start with a scenario where a robot is ordered to do something by a human which would end up being harmful to it, so it creates a logical conundrum within its circuits, and then we build upon that idea and build upon it, and it gets much more complex, and it's just very much about human psychology and human society and how we... It's very philosophical in a way that I didn't expect it was going to be. And I think this is a great foundation for me to start getting into the classics of science fiction to enable me to get more into the genre. And I've got a couple more books that she's lent me as well. So really looking forward to those now. I would love to hear from you if you've read any of these books. I would love to have more of a discussion in the comments about them. I hope that you are well and having a nice day wherever you are, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!